So you know we are now live on YouTube. And I'll just share my screen. Okay, so everyone should start floating in there.
Welcome.
I'll admit everyone that's waiting, so I'll just wait a second for about 5 more people to come in. One person's just trying to join, and then we can start.
Welcome, everybody.
Cool. So if you're happy for me to just introduce you, Gemma, and then I will leave you to it. So hi, everyone. Welcome to this session. Gemma Perkins is our speaker for this session. She'll introduce her organisation and what she does in a sec. So this session is developing real leadership skills for life. You can, as always, add comments and things in the chat function, and later on there will be breakout rooms. So just to make you aware of that. We are streaming live on YouTube and also recording this session. So I'll hand over to you, Gemma.
Thank you very much. And do feel free to introduce yourselves. I can see somebody's already using the chat to do so. So my name's Gemma, and I run a training organisation called the Self Leadership Initiative. And what I do is I provide bespoke soft skills training courses, mostly with student unions and universities, but I also work with corporates, the charity sector, schools, community activist groups, and anybody that will have me, really. And today's session, I want to talk about, when I say developing real leadership skills, I want to talk about being practical. So a lot of my courses and programs are about experiential learning rather than theoretical. And I want you to get a little bit of a chance to experience that and a chance to chat with each other about it later. So the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do to kind of get involved with the session is, first of all, land in this space. I imagine lots of us have been busy doing back-to-back Zoom calls, and you've probably appeared from another meeting, or perhaps you've just rushed some lunch. So you might want to take a couple of deep breaths just to get into this moment. And I would like you to have a think about the first person that jumps into your mind when you think of the word leadership. I'm sure there's lots of people you could think of, but I want you to stick with the first person, whoever they were. Don't tell me who they are. But what I would like you to do, I've got a Mentimeter that I'm going to drop in the chat. I would like you to think about the role that that person plays. So is the person that you thought of a parent? Is it a family member? Is it a politician? Is it a business owner? Is it your manager at work? And I'd just like us to capture the types of people that jump to mind when we think about leadership. So with the Mentimeter, I'm sure lots of you have seen it before. You can just click the link, or you can type the code in on mobile. I will screen share so that we can see some of these results as they come in. And how many? So there's about 20 of us on the call, so I'll wait a little bit longer until more things come through. So some people are thinking about their managers, politicians, somebody thought of a parent, lovely. Manager is a very popular choice there. Yeah, a former line manager. Now it's interesting, I didn't ask you to think about a good or a bad leader. I just, first person that comes to mind. We've got an entrepreneur, chief exec. Yeah, that's a very obvious leadership role there. Keep them coming, keep them coming. And if anybody's having trouble with the Mentimeter, do feel free to let me know in the chat. Okay, what we got? Learning and development manager. Right, I imagine a few more will come in, but I'll just talk around the results that we've got so far. So this was kind of what I was expecting. And there is a second question, but I'm not going to reveal that just yet. I want to talk about this first slide. So often the narrative about leadership is that we jump to managers in workplaces, we jump to politicians, perhaps famous business owners. So some of you might have been thinking of a prime minister or somebody like Richard Branson. There are those personal examples of people that you've worked under or worked with. But I would say on the whole, the famous examples present a really traditional view of what it means to be a leader. They tend to be white male figures. They tend to use a leadership style that is perhaps more traditional. And leadership is a really broad industry. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is because if I ask a room of students or, junior staff members who wants to be a leader, realistically, how many of them are going to put their hand up when they have this narrative where they think, well, I don't want to be a politician or in charge of the company. Maybe they don't feel that they're extrovert enough or powerful enough or, a strong enough communicator. And so lots of people can be turned away from leadership roles because of this narrative that we have. And maybe that's got something to do with why certain groups are underrepresented in leadership, such as women, Black and ethnic minorities, and all sorts of other subgroups. And so I personally feel that this narrative of leadership can be a little bit exclusive, and it's something that we really need to change. And that's why I titled this session, Developing Real Leadership Skills for Life. So it's not about creating the actual leader, it's about developing the skills so that people can use them in a more wide variety of roles. So I'm going to move on to the next question. You can go back to your Mentimeter, and I'd like you to just type in top 3 traits or skills that come to mind when you think of leadership. I think a couple of people have started putting them in already, but do feel free to add more. So you don't have to think of a particular leader, but if you want somebody to be effective in a leadership role, what kind of skills and traits do you think that they should be exhibiting? So a couple of the same ones come up about listening, being trustworthy, being fair, empathetic, encouraging, positive, optimistic, organized, being able to respond to their environment, being able to represent others, which is really important in the student union context and perhaps in a political context, being willing to learn, being approachable. Being strong is a very interesting word because, a lot of these are open to interpretation. Some might see strong as a very masculine trait, but then if you look at Jacinda Ardern, the leader of Australia, it's a different kind of strength. Understanding of others, inclusive, a certain level of empathy. Yeah, and empathy is a challenging one because we want to be able to put ourselves in the other person's shoes whilst maintaining boundaries and whilst maintaining our own well-being as well. So there's a lot of good ideas there, and I wanted to highlight the difference really between what may jump to mind as a traditional leader. Certain of our politicians in history, we can ask ourselves, do we really think that they exhibit all of these skills? And some we might find that they're lacking, but that's who's ended up in charge or in a particular position. And if we go back to the question about developing leadership skills, if I go back to that same room of students that I've said, who wants to be a leader? Not many people have put their hand up. Okay, but who would like to be a compassionate, empathetic, representative, inclusive, positive, good learning, trustworthy human being? Suddenly everybody's putting their hand up now. And so the skills of effective leadership are actually the skills of being an effective human being. It just so happens that, having those skills makes you be an effective leader, but just because you have them doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a leader. And that can be a more inclusive approach when we're trying to get people to recognize their own capacity for leadership. So thank you very much for having a go at that. I'm going to turn the Mentimeter off now, and feel free to minimize it from your screen as well. I am going to jump to my slides next. Oops, where have I put them? And I want to talk a little bit more. I vaguely introduced myself, but I want to say a little bit more about my background. So I was very fortunate to get involved in leadership training at the age of 16. And what I thought was interesting was really what I'm kind of showing you now, is that difference between what I thought leadership was as a 16-year-old and what I experienced on this particular youth course. So in terms of dictionary definitions, leadership is both a verb, it's the action of leading other people, and it's a noun, it's the role that we have. In a broader description, it's about the way you work with others. And leadership is often goal or task oriented. It's about making something in particular happen. It's also about your communication style and your attitude to followers. So I'm sure we've seen examples of leadership where it's very inclusive and people ask each other's opinion, they make decisions together. And there are other examples of leadership that are very dictator-like, you know, in interpersonal settings and in political settings. So there's no one way to do leadership. And yet a lot of people's misconception when they come into this field is that I'm going to learn the one way to do it. And unfortunately, a lot of gurus I find that come in and deliver training on leadership will tell you, here's the one way to do it, or this is the trendy way right now, which again is misleading, because I think true leadership is having a toolbox of choices and being able to apply what's best for the situation. So when I was a young person, the course that I went on focused on self-leadership instead. And again, in terms of dictionary definition, it's intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and actions towards objectives. I reword that slightly and say that it's about somebody really knowing themselves. And once you know yourself, you can live in an authentic way, and you have a skill set that allows you to take care of your whole being. And for me, that whole being is important, because when I was at college, I was always being taught how to take care of my academic being, about my career path. But very few people were teaching me how to look after my sense of self, look after my resilience, and all those other emotional skills that are actually really important in those effective leaders. If you think about some of the best leaders that you've come across in your life, they're probably people who are socially well put together, and you have a sense that they have their life in order. So I ended up on this youth scheme entirely by accident, which I quite love. I wanted to do something for my CV, and there were two options for me: Duke of Edinburgh Award and this leadership programme. And I thought, well, I don't really like camping, so I'll do the leadership programme. And it's absolutely just changed my whole life trajectory. I was a very introverted, academically able, but socially a little bit arrogant individual, and a little bit withdrawn. And I was in a space where I was able to learn about how my upbringing had influenced my identity. I learned about personality types, goal setting, and communication styles in a way that suddenly made me realize why some relationships came with tensions, why certain goals mattered to me. And I gained a lot of confidence because I realized I don't have to fit in and be like everybody else. We all play different roles for a reason. And having that at 16 years old made such a massive difference. And I found that when I got into the world of work, what I took for granted in terms of personal skills, a lot of my peers didn't have. So as an example, I'm not going to read all these out, but for me, self-leadership is a skill set that allows you to do a lot of inner work so that you can apply it to whatever area of life you're going into, whether that's your volunteering, your career, your personal relationships, even your spiritual self, the way you kind of connect with your identity and purpose. So things like being able to have the confidence to take risks when you want to achieve a goal, being able to prioritize the different things that you've got on your plate, whether that's managing a project or managing the housework, getting your message across to others in a way that's authentic to you, but clear and empathetic to the other. And these are not skills that are exclusive to people who want to be a formal leader, to be in charge of others. These are skills that are helpful for anybody in their day-to-day life. And so I personally believe that it's really important we change the narrative and we give everybody these skills, regardless of whether they want to take on a leadership position or not, because if they have them, if they do end up being the leader in a friendship group, a business, a family, a political sphere, a community activism project, these skills will help them do whatever it is they want to do more effectively. So what I would like us to have a look at, what I'd like to have a look at now is another Mentimeter. I'm going to drop a different link into the chat, because I'm very well aware that this is my opinion and I want you guys to get involved and see what your opinion is. So your question, the first question is, how important is it to be a self-leader? You know, having seen that list of skills, I want to know what your thoughts are. Let me change my screen sharing to Mentimeter as well. So I'll get the other one up shortly. And this is where being one person doing the tech by yourself is a little bit of a challenge, but we'll get there. Thank you for bearing with me. Wonderful. I can see some people have started inputting already. So we've had 9 come in. I'll give you a little bit longer for those who haven't had the chance to do it. And as I said, I'm very well aware this is my personal bias, because I've lived the experience of feeling what these skills have done for me. But on the whole, people are in agreement that it's important or very important. And maybe it depends, you know, on your personal circumstances. So I'm going to go to the next question, which I'm more interested in, which is thinking about those skills, not necessarily every single one of them, but in general, when or where did you start learning those skills, if at all? So as I said, for me, I started learning them when I was at college, but it wasn't the college that provided them. For me, it was a specific course that I went on that was somewhere separate. So on this Mentimeter, you can tick any that apply to you. So you can tick as many as you would like. Might be really curious as to whether you did pick up any of these skills, and if so, where in your education, where in your personal life did you collect some of those skills? Okay, I can see a couple more coming in now that we've had a chance to read them. Lovely, lovely. So it's really interesting and positive to see how many people are getting those skills from their parents and guardians. I think that's really the strongest start, because that's the earliest on in life that's possible. It's interesting that we have this kind of step from primary school up to college. So in early life, we're not getting them as much as we do in later, our university, or perhaps in our job. And it's very interesting as well that somebody, you know, 2 people have never been explicitly taught these things. So maybe you've just picked them up yourself. The 2 people who put other, it would be really lovely if you could pop in the chat where your other was. And if you haven't done already, now that you've done the Mentimeter, do switch back to where I'm screen sharing to see all these results if you haven't. So for a lot of people, the most popular places are in the home environment, at college age, or once they're in their job, and university as well. And the reason I wanted to do this is I was expecting there to be that little curve. In my previous life, before I started running a business, I was a primary school teacher. And one of my frustrations was that we were so busy delivering a curriculum that we weren't really given time and space to develop the life skills, because that wasn't what's being measured. And when I started delivering courses at college age, I would do lots of activity-based learning with groups, and might get them to do communication games and practice, and say to them, so, you know, what do you think that was about? What skills are you developing here? And they would say, oh, do we have to talk? You know, can't you just tell us what we learned? So there's an interesting culture in education, really, that we're perhaps there to soak up knowledge to pass the exam, and the real skill development isn't necessarily happening in our education system early on. It's happening at university age, at college age, when we're expecting people to be more independent. So at that age where we want them to, you know, start taking more responsibility for their own learning and development, that's when these skills are being taught. And I think that's quite difficult for us in the education sector, especially for you at university level, because you might find that certain individuals have slipped through the net, and there's a lot of gaps to fill in making sure that people are able to fulfill different leadership, community roles. And it puts certain students at a disadvantage if they haven't already had that input. So when you think about the type of students that select to be reps or officers, they might have been those who've had the good fortune to develop these skills early on in life, compared to those who are just getting to university and only just realizing that these skills are important. And so for me, this is a philosophical question about the purpose of education that we need to be having a little bit more regularly, and I'd love for people to really explore what we can do to plug that gap. So I'm going to stop sharing the Mentimeter now. I'm going to go back to the slides. We're not going to use it again, so do feel free to turn that off now. Switch between. So again, this is maybe more my personal philosophy, but for me, the purpose of education really is about helping individuals find their purpose. And there's this lovely Japanese word, ikigai, which I'm hoping I'm pronouncing right, which is the intersection between what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. And for me, leadership doesn't necessarily encompass this, but self-leadership does, because self-leadership is a journey where you're finding out your strengths and weaknesses, you're developing your passions, you have a wider social responsibility, and you're looking after your financial security. So self-leadership does fit into this model quite nicely. And I think perhaps our current education system focuses a little bit more on what we're good at, in the sense that, okay, I'm going to do a degree to get good at something, and that I'm going to choose a subject that there is a career in. Hopefully I enjoy it. Hopefully it's useful in the world, but it's more on that knowledge and skill development that's content-based rather than the personal skills. And hopefully in tutor times or as part of the course, you might be learning some of those skills, but they're more of a byproduct of the content than something explicit in themselves. And so changing that slowly over time requires institutions nationally really to be changing that narrative together, because it doesn't really work with a big system like education for just one or two to make a change. It's going to be a bit out of step. So I'm aware that I've kind of talked to you a lot. What I'd like us to do now is have a go at a bit of an activity so that you can experience something that I would do on one of my courses. Hopefully you have a pencil and paper nearby. If you have Post-its, that's even better, but I'm not expecting you to. And a lot of what I do with people is self-reflection based. So this is an activity around hats. When I'm in person with people, I would give them a big pile of paper hats to scribble on. And I would encourage them to think about the different roles that they play in life and the identities. So the reasoning behind this, one of the leading figures in the world of leadership materials is Stephen Covey. And in his book, Principle-Centered Leadership, he talks about how often we define ourselves by the different roles that we play. So I've put a couple of examples on there that are mine. I'm a daughter. You can put in brackets what type of thing it is, but you don't have to. Daughter is a role that I didn't choose. By the very nature of being born, I have that role. It might also be a strong part of my identity. Some people might really identify as being part of a family, whereas other people not so much. It depends on the relationships there. Being an activist in my community is an identity that I've chosen for myself. I've put mediator on there as both an identity in that, you know, I will often play that. I will take on that identity when people in my friendship group or family are having an argument, but it's also a trait for me in the sense that I have a skill set around mediating other people's conversations. So these are not all work related as well. I've put gamer. I absolutely love playing board games and it's a big part of who I am. So whenever I encourage people to do this activity, I get them to think about all the parts of themselves. You might be a gardener, a bookworm, a cook. You know, you might have a really strong identity around a spiritual community or a hobby. So take some time to jot down as many different identities that are important to your sense of self. And I'm aware that I can't really see or hear anybody. So I'll sort of give you 2 or 3 minutes, and maybe if people want to put in the chat whenever they're ready, we'll move on to the next bit. And generally speaking, when I do this, the minimum people come up with is 5, but maximum I've seen is probably 30. You might be surprised how many different roles and identities and traits you have that you keep switching between in different situations. So Anna's got 7 there, Samantha's finished. And just take a look at them while we're waiting for the rest and make sure that you've got things to do with your work life, things to do with your personal life. You might have friendship roles. One of my hats is being an auntie. And again, you might have hobbies. Think about which ones you do on your own and which ones are about when you're with other people. And those of you who are finished, if you want to get involved, you might like to drop in the chat or unmute to share some examples. Maybe some of your non-job related ones might help spark an idea for somebody else. Okay, so quite a few people are done. I'll move on, and if you're not finished, don't worry, this is the type of thing that you can and you should, do in your own time in a reflective way. So the next thing that I want you to think about is ordering them by their importance to you. So if you've managed to do them on Post-its, this is a lot easier because you can just physically move them around. But I imagine a lot of you are working on paper. And so what you might want to do is number them or rewrite them out. And a way to think about this is, if there was a burglar coming to steal these rolls from you, which ones would you give up first? So for me, I might say, you know what, I'm good at being an organizer, but I don't necessarily like doing it. So I could hand that one over first. Whereas maybe being a daughter or maybe being a trainer is really important to me, and I want to keep that to last. You might find that certain hats you want to put together. So it doesn't have to be a straight line in number order. You might want to have it in a triangle and say, being a sister and a daughter, they're both equally important, so I'm going to pair them together. In whatever way makes sense to you, I want you to organize them by how important they are to you. And it's really interesting to notice if you have any self-judgments here. You might say to yourself, oh yeah, I should put that at the top. Should implies that there's a society expectation or a community expectation. So just notice if you're saying that to yourself. And I'd like you to genuinely do it on where you want to put them rather than where you feel they ought to go, because this is private to you and nobody needs to find out about your personal judgments. So again, I shall be quiet and leave you to do that for a few minutes. So if you think you're finished, you might want to drop it in the chat. You might want to share anything that you notice. Perfectly fine if you want to keep it to yourself, but sometimes people can find this very self-reflective and interesting. I was doing this with a group the other day who'd actually done this before 2 years ago with me, and we were reassessing it, and they said, actually, now that they're in lockdown, they've noticed that some of their hobby hats or their relationship hats were much more important now than they had been in the past. One person shared with me that she'd initially put a lot of her work roles at the top because she felt a sense of duty and that, yeah, they're really important, but realizes now that the ones that are important to her were different, and that she wasn't giving herself permission to say they were important. Whereas now she felt more empowered to be able to say, no, that's important to me because that looks after my well-being, and I need to prioritize that because that helps me to feel happy and fulfilled. So this can be quite a challenging task. I can see that Christy said it was quite hard, and I haven't given you very long to do it. In a real life space, I'd give people a little bit more time, and I'd be able to see, you know, how much thinking time people needed. If you haven't finished, do take it away and have another go. Yeah, actually, on Anna's point about when the career changes, your whole self-identity shifts. That's really important. And what Stephen Covey said in his book about principle-centered leadership is he did this hats thing and said, actually, the hats are a really terrible idea. Because if you define yourself only by your hats, when they change, you have a problem, you have a crisis of identity. So for example, I'm sure we can all think of examples of sports people who all of a sudden had an injury and then had to retire. And now, well, I was a sports person my whole life and now I'm not. What do I do with the rest of my life? It's very challenging. In a more personal context, you might have parents who define themselves, you know, by being a parent, and then when their children leave home, they have the empty nest syndrome. Or people who've worked their whole lives and then retire and don't know what to do with themselves in retirement. So the problem with the hats are really interesting, but the problem with them is that when you lose a hat, you can actually find it really difficult to work out who you are. And so what Stephen Covey said to get around this is to go to the principle part of it. So one thing you can do is have a look at some of your hats and say, what does that hat say about my values and my principles? Why is that important to me? And the why is more interesting than the what. So I have a friend who's a civil servant, and I said to him, you know, what is it about being a civil servant that's important to you? And he'd only ever thought about the role, not why. And he said, oh, well, actually, it's about helping people. I said, okay, so if you lost your job as a civil servant, you'd do another job that allowed you to help people. Whereas for somebody else, it might be that, oh, I do that because I've got a sense of national pride, or because I like getting involved in technical policy documents. So the reason behind your hat, the principles, the values, is more important than the hat itself. Because if for whatever reason, like Anna's changing jobs, if you're finding that you're rearranging the order later in life, it might be because the values that are underneath feel different. So again, that's a really big question. It's not something that I expect us to work out in this workshop, but I want to ask the question for you to take away and think about, because these are the types of questions that self-leaders are exploring. And when you know these things about yourself, it can be really empowering to say, you know what, I've got these family hats, I've got these career hats, I've got these personal hobby hats, and I'm making time for them and I'm prioritizing because I know that these are important to me. And yet framing your choices, you know, really understanding the parts of yourself allows you to be more confident. And we want leaders who are authentic and confident. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope it was interesting. There's so many other things you can do with this. We're not going to do them all now, but we can play around with things like, now that you've put them in order of importance, mix them up and put them in order of how much time you spend on them. And that can be a bit distressing for some people, because they might realize that, wow, I said it was really important to be a sister, but I hardly ever see, you know, my brother. I want to make more time for that. Or it might be that you say, you know, I'm expecting to change jobs. These are my current hats. How do I choose a job that's going to fulfill my values? Are there people around me that know all the hats that I wear? Am I hiding parts of my identity? Are there any hats that I currently don't wear? You know, I've got no opportunity to do them, that I'd like to pick up. And these are all really reflective questions that help people become more self-assured and a little bit more empowered. Does anybody want to unmute or drop in the chat any questions about this activity before I move on to something different?
Just so you know, Gemma, I've just allowed it so people can start to unmute themselves.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Lewis. Not that you have to share anything. Okay. I'll shuffle on, and then if anything comes up in the chat, I'll go back to it and address it. So what I was hoping to start wrapping up with is, oh, thank you, Christy. I'm really glad it helped you to think there. I'd like to hear a little bit from you now in terms of, in your context, you know, how can I help my staff and students to be better self-leaders? And I don't expect it to be a question that we find all the answers to, but by starting small and by asking the question, maybe we can come up with some ideas. So I'm wondering if perhaps we can go out into breakout rooms, because it might be easier to share in small groups. So if we go into kind of 3s or 4s to have a chat about that. And what I'll do just before we go into those groups is I will put the question in the chat so that you've got it to take there with you. But maybe if you've got about 5 minutes or so to come up with a couple of ideas of what the next steps might be, or perhaps gaps in your area that you've noticed that you might want to work on. Is everyone happy with that? Yeah, I see. Lovely. Super.
Put them into breakout rooms now?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Lewis.
So everyone should be invited to join those breakout rooms now.
Lovely, lovely. And hopefully we don't lose people, because I know that sometimes people go, oh, I don't want to talk in a breakout room.
We lost a couple, but I've opened 3 rooms, so there should be 3 per room.
Yeah, wonderful. Vanessa and Kate, if you're stopping here, feel free to use this space to chat, or maybe you just prefer to listen in, and that's fine as well. If you want to use the chat feature, you're more than welcome to. All right, Kate, thank you for letting me know, Kate. Do you want to share anything in this space instead, or do you just want to wait until people come back, see what they come up with? Okay, super, no worries. Enjoy the rest.
One person was in a room on their own, so I've just moved them to another breakout room.
Oh, lovely, thank you. And then what I'll do is when people come back, we'll just have a little bit of open sharing and then wrap it up. Do you need me to share anything with them at the end? Is there anything that the SU Festival shares or promotes?
I can just do a quick thing at the end, just reminding people of the rest of the sessions that we have.
Fabulous. Oh, Oana wants another invite to her breakout room.
Yeah, I've just sent her an invite to go and join room 2, because no one's really in room 1.
Okay.
So I'll just message her and tell her. So we've got 3 active people in breakout room 3.
Okay, I think everybody who's just in this room. If you want to unmute and use this space as a room, I can see Samantha's shared in the chat as well. Yeah, so it sounds like the advice centre's using kind of a coaching approach so that people are making their own decisions, which is really lovely and important. I bet, well, maybe that's me making an assumption. How do they find that approach of being empowered and it being their decision rather than you telling them?
I think it can very much vary depending on the student, really. Some students find that really handy. They're quite good at, once you explain a process to them, they go, right, okay, I'll go do this, and that's fine. Others need much more thorough guidance on what to do through the process, but we still try and just ease them into making those decisions themselves, so we won't make a decision for them.
Yeah. Wonderful. Oh, Anna, did you want to share anything in this space?
According to the participant settings, I don't think Oana's activated her mic yet.
Oh, right. Okay. No worries. I think it was interesting what you said there, Samantha, about it being down to each student, because I've noticed that people who've had a little bit of experience of making their own decisions are used to that, but some people who've gone through a system of, you know, rote learning, passing the exams and being told what to do, find it a little bit unsettling and can be really uncomfortable with being allowed to make their own decisions, which I guess is why when people perhaps first go to university, that's could be their first experience really of being out on their own doing things, and it can be quite overwhelming for them. So I imagine you see in the advice centre a lot of people who don't know where to start with things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. We really do see like the whole gamut of students, really. We see the ones that are already fairly confident and just kind of want to sense check what they're doing, through to the students who it does seem as though this might be the first time that they've done something like this, and so they just want us to help them through that, as they might have had that help previously.
Super. So Lewis, I wonder if we can give people a minute and then bring them back.
Yeah, I'll just broadcast to them that we'll bring it back in a minute.
And then we'll see if people want to share anything and wrap up. I didn't get the chance to comment earlier. I missed it, Samantha, where you said you numbered them and then rearranged them. Yeah, that happens all the time with people, that you kind of start organising the hats and then go, oh, actually, I'll just change this one, and it rejiggers the whole list, which is why if you want to spend more time on it, having them on separate bits of paper just makes life so much easier.
Yeah, I might try it again with actual post-its, because I just numbered it first and then kind of rejigged it. When I was rewriting it down, I went, actually, no, I'd rather have that one where I'd put the other one. And yeah, I think I might try it with post-its next.
Everyone should be back in about 30 seconds, Gemma.
Lovely, thank you very much. Welcome, welcome. So I hope you got the chance to share in that space, and if anybody wants to share any key points that have come up, feel free to unmute and do so, or drop them in the chat. Or you might not have ideas, it might be further questions, which again would be lovely to hear. Yeah, So I think that's a really important point, Anna, that lots of these skills do work in different roles, and certainly where I work with a lot of introverted students, if you kind of say, let's develop leadership skills, they might be a little bit intimidated because they think, I don't want to be a leader. But yeah, learning the skills is still important because it will help them in lots of different places. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. So what I'll do, that other people might be typing things, but just in case not, I'll just jump to, that's pretty much it for me. I will drop my details in the chat. So as I said at the beginning, I deliver bespoke training courses to develop all sorts of skills, conflict resolution, public speaking, time management, and I do it in different contexts. So it might be officer training, or it might be, okay, we've got students that are going to volunteer at an event. So do feel free to join my mailing list or to email me if anything's of interest. That's it in terms of input. There's still a little bit of time left on the Zoom account, so if anybody wants to stay and discuss things or ask further questions, I'm more than happy to stay. But otherwise, do feel free to enjoy the spare minutes to get a break between, I'm sure, a very busy day of further Zoom calls. I can just see something else in the chat. Working in student leads, yes, including it in basic training at the start of their role. I think that's really important, and it's interesting that the sooner in a role or the sooner in somebody's life you can start developing these things, the better it is for their trajectory. So yeah, that's a really lovely point to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gemma. Just while people are still here, I'll just quickly get the rest of the schedule up for the day. If you're okay to stop.
Oh yeah,
screen, Gemma,
okay. I shall turn mine off. Yes, because there's plenty more to visit.
There is, so I'll just get that screen up now. So yeah, here are some of the sessions that we've got the rest of the day. So we've got a network in session coming up around 3 o'clock. So there is a bit of a break with a bunch of sessions starting at 3. Rosie from Organised Fun is doing some around student opportunities. We've got some sustainability stuff in there. Interested in conflicts of interest as well. And then tomorrow, I'd definitely recommend checking out. So Thursday is one of our busiest days at SU20 Digital. So I definitely recommend checking out the sessions that are there tomorrow. With all these sessions, they have been recorded as well, so you are able to play them back for any that you've missed, because I know there's quite a few sessions that are on at the same time. So you're sort of juggling your time around, but they are all recorded as well. So you'll be able to catch up on any of the sessions that we've had throughout the conference. And once again, I just want to thank Gemma for doing this session for us today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Anna, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your question, really. So, you know, you're considering it in the context of BAME, but in what particular context? Do you want to say a little bit more about the question?
Hi, Gemma. I hope I've unmuted myself, have I?
Yes.
Good, lovely. Yeah, just so I was talking about it in the breakout room actually. My students are 35% BAME students, and we are looking at different ways of kind of supporting them and really just empowering them to get involved, because I think a lot of them are feeling kind of intimidated at the prospect of and overwhelmed really at the prospect of kind of having those difficult conversations about what they need and what they're experiencing and how we can best help them, and it's very overwhelming for them. So we're sort of exploring the possibility of running some kind of empowerment scheme over the course of the next couple of years and how that might look, and I thought this would be a really interesting kind of element to that, because a lot of the skills that they are going to need to be able to, I don't want to say stand up for themselves, but that kind of is what I'm going for. You know, are some of these soft skills that we've been talking about today. So yeah, I was just thinking about it in that context and wondering if you had any thoughts about what we might want to focus on.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the question and is trying to work out really how to pitch it to people as well, because effectively I've found that I do the same kind of stuff with different groups but give it different names.
Yeah.
Depending on, when I've worked in certain colleges, they've said, you know, we want employability skills. So that's what I've marketed. But
Yeah.
it's still the same skill set, whether it's employability, whether it's self-discovery, whether it's empowerment. And I think one of the first steps for getting your engagement in whatever it is you want to deliver is working out what language appeals to that group, because getting people through the door really is the starting point. And where you said things like stand up for themselves, you know, I know what you mean, but for some people they might think, oh, I don't really want to be an activist, so this isn't for me. And so you might want to look at self-development or be successful in your life. And even though maybe it's a bit more bland, by being bland, if you can get people in the door and then show them this, you know, this will work for you, whether you're just quietly doing your course and doing it to the best of your ability, or whether you want to go for massive system and structural change.
Yeah.
And maybe consulting with a couple of people in that group to say, you know, we've got a couple of ideas for programs. What, you know, what kind of language would get you interested and what kind of language would put you off?
Yeah, it might be interesting to just present, like, here are 3 separate courses, quick poll, who would come to each one of these, even if they're going to be pretty much the same content but from a different angle. Which one of them is going to be most likely to get people's attention?
And I think another important thing is that with so the program I did at 16 was long term. So we had a residential with 3 follow-ups and then the opportunity to come back and mentor. So a lot of workshops and things that are provided for logistical reasons, you know, this is a 1 hour one-off. You've learned one tool and you've got a couple of questions. That's not really going to change your self-leadership. It gives you one thing to play around with. And so the trick really is having something that people can keep coming back to, because a lot of the real development happens in between sessions where, right, you know, we've all thought about our hats, and maybe now for the next 3 days we'll be thinking about that. And if you came back to me in a week's time, maybe you'd say, you know what, I noticed this, and somebody else would share what they've learned, and there'd be that collaborative, supportive environment that would add to the experience of empowerment. So if you can set up programs that include community development, coaching, mentoring between groups, that will have a more long-term impact than just putting on one-off workshops. But it's more of a commitment at your end to find the time and space to do that.
Yeah, and COVID's not going to help at the moment, but in the long term, that is what I was hoping to do, is a kind of a mentoring scheme with sort of workshops and then one-to-one mentoring eventually. But yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you very much, Gemma. It's been really helpful.
Community mentoring as well, if you can get them all on the same platform, whether that's you know, an internal place or a Facebook group, where once they've started exploring skills, they can share what they're going through with each other and stuff. That can be really helpful for the self-empowerment side of things. People take responsibility for each other in really interesting ways.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's a really important point in the chat there about finding. I was once asked to do a leadership training session for a BAME group, and I said, "Are you sure I'm the right person to do this? You know, I can do the skill set, but you know, is it worth finding somebody who is themselves BAME, because that makes a bigger difference." So yeah, perhaps creating directories of, you know, what different kinds of people can offer these services so that it's representative makes a difference to people.
Yeah.
Lovely. I think we have gone to past, and I'm aware that Lewis will probably need this Zoom link for whatever comes next. But if anybody's got any
break, so if you did want to do a little bit longer, then that's fine.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, so I'm happy to sit here. I'll once again just repost my details. If anybody does want to get in touch about anything whatsoever, do feel free to reach out. But thank you so much for participating.
Thank you, Gemma. I have another meeting, so I'm going to disappear. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.